And now it's my pleasure to introduce and welcome back today's speaker, Stephen Hassan. In addition to being a very dear friend and a really nice person, Stephen is one of the foremost authorities on cults and mind control. He is a licensed mental health counselor and the author of 3 of the most respected books on the subject of cults. I know we only have 2 books here. One is an updated version of the second book. With more than 36 years of cult awareness activism, his insightful perspective and expert commentary have made him a definitive source for hundreds of national, international, and local media outlets, including USA Today, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, Newsweek, Oprah Winfrey Show, 60 Minutes, Nightline, Good Morning America, CNN, Anderson Cooper, and Piers Morgan. He is also the founder of the Freedom of Mind Resource Center. His talk today, Freedom of Mind, Helping Loved Ones Leave Controlling People, Cults, and Beliefs. Please welcome Steve Hassan.
Thanks again for inviting me. I have a bad head cold, so I'm apologizing in advance if I sound like a frog. And thanks for the music. Wow. Listen to the music, don't listen to me. Thank you for inviting me, and Ethical Culture Society has been a friend, because my dearest friend is involved here, but having their support is really important to me. So I guess I want to say a few things. I was here a couple of years ago, and we videotaped that, and that's on the internet. So I don't want to repeat the same speech that I did last year, telling you that I grew up in Queens, next door to Monica, Flushing, and was recruited into the Moonies when I was at Queens College, and dropped out of school, quit my job, and had a radical personality change. And my family rescued me after I fell asleep at the wheel of a van, and in my deprogramming, which was what they called it back in 1976, I realized what brainwashing was. I realized, in fact, what the Moonies did to me and what I did to others as a leader of the Moonies was basically akin to what the Chinese communists were doing in the 50s and 60s, albeit much more sophisticated. And that I'm commenting because Robert J. Lifton, who wrote the definitive book on the subject, Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, looked me in the eye and told me that. He said, what you're describing is much more sophisticated than what the Chinese did. And he said, besides, I only studied it secondhand, and they did it to you, and you did it to others, so you know more than me. And for me, as a 22-year-old college dropout who was very ashamed of having been in the Moonies and believed that this fat Korean businessman was the greatest divine being in human history on Earth, this Yale, he was teaching at Yale at the time, this Yale psychiatrist, this eminent scholar, was saying I knew something valuable to share. It was a life-changing moment for me. Who knew I was going to be 36 years later giving talks about it and doing media, but I'm more passionate than ever because frankly the problem is worse than ever. So this morning I typically do news.google.com. Have you discovered news.google.com? But it's kind of a portal for all news coming through Google. So I put in words like cult or brainwashing or Scientology or the Moonies, and you find out what news somewhere in the world is on that particular group. And I found out that the Moonies had a mass wedding yesterday with 15,000 couples. The first mass wedding since the founder died last September. Boo! That's a subject of opinion, I understand. Maybe they'll sue me for my opinion. But no, really, not to make a joke of it, these people are totally indoctrinated into this totalistic belief system and are not able to think for themselves. And for those of you who have never heard me before or read my books or seen videos of me, I basically want to quickly define what I mean by a destructive mind control cult, a la Moonies or Scientology, or World Mission Society, Church of God, or any number of other cults, is basically, I look at it not in terms of the beliefs as much as the practices and the behaviors. And I basically talk about groups that are pyramid structured, authoritarian, totalistic, that use deception and recruitment, which is a key concept in my opinion, that people do not know what they're getting involved with. And to use a legal term, lack of informed consent. That people do not understand what the group believes, what they're all about, what's going to happen to them when they say yes to that first free dinner or free lecture or whatever. So there's deceptive recruitment, and then there's what I refer to as the BITE model, but it's basically a model that's based on Lifton's 8 criteria of thought reform or brainwashing, or Margaret Singer was an army psychologist studying Chinese communist brainwashing. She came up with 6 conditions of thought reform. My model is, I refer to it as the BITE model, BITE, which stands for behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control. Okay? So and you can go to my website, freedomofmind.com, and on the right it says the BITE model. You can click on it and see the laundry list of sub-variables under behavior control, like controlling sleep, controlling food, controlling privacy, needing to get permission for major life decisions, etc. You can go down the list. And essentially, if you imagine a continuum of ethical influence and unethical influence, what we're talking about is this side of the continuum, right? Because there's a lot of confusion. One person's religion is another person's cult. Well, for me, the framework isn't religion. The framework is undue influence or ethical influence. Ethical influence, undue influence. And so a lot of the clients that I work with, they're not in religious cults even. They're in psychotherapy cults, they're in business cults, they're in political cults, they're in cults of personality. Literally why I changed the title of the new book, Controlling People, because there's a whole lot of just individuals who dominate another human being and isolate them from their family and friends and make them feel terrible about themselves and undermine their ability to think critically. So, I don't know how many of you have seen Lawrence Wright. He's a Pulitzer Prize-winning author who wrote a book called Going Clear. That's his latest book about Scientology. He's been everywhere in the media. His website is lawrencewright.com. He has videos up of some of his appearances. Fantastic writer, great book, but I read the book and I was like so upset. I was raging at the missed opportunity because he's a brilliant writer. He's focusing on one of the most destructive cults in the United States in terms of my 30 years of experience, because I've been a suppressive person for 36 years, according to Scientology. That's their term for a bad person who speaks critical things about L. Hubbard. Anyway, he had 2 pages on the whole issue of thought reform and mind control, and he framed it as it's a contentious theory that people debate about. And I actually did a little video blog where I said, doing a book on Scientology and saying you're going to explain how it works and what the prison of belief is without talking about mind control or undue influence is like writing a book about cars and leaving out gas combustion engines. It's like you can't do it, in my opinion. So anyway, I'm sure I'm in hot water with a bunch of people who love him and love his work. But it just breaks my heart when I hear incredibly intelligent, talented people like Paul Haggis, the filmmaker who was in Scientology for 35 years, who was featured in the book, going on national television saying, I was stupid for believing this. I'm ashamed of myself that I could have ever been allowed myself to be taken by these people. Because he's missing the whole process of how he was recruited, the deception, the manipulation. Do you know in Scientology they have these supposed secret levels that you'll die if you find out the information before you, and the New York Times did a front cover story on Scientology, the cult of greed, and outed the big secret about Xenu and the galactic dictatorship. Anyway, I haven't died either. But so I'm grateful that my family did an intervention with me because I was only in for 2.5 years. I'm working with some people who are coming out after 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. And they're coming to their parents, and their parents were like, we should have done something, shouldn't we have? Or something. And they were just frozen. They were convinced by the members' passion. I'm happy, I'm an adult, I know what I'm doing. You know, leave me alone, you're just trying to control me. They bought into that propaganda programming of the cult, when in fact they saw a radical personality change with their loved one. They watched people who were passionate about music give up music, or passionate about dance and art and give those up, cut off contact, marry strangers. But in this culture of the United States and the world, it's, well, people are adults, they can choose. Well, I beg to differ. You can mess with people's minds and interfere with their ability to choose. That's my life work. You can install a phobia in someone's mind that if they go to a mental health professional, they're going to be electroshocked, lobotomized, hypnotized, or drugged. That's what Scientology does. They put phobias in members' minds against anyone else who might be able to help them with whatever issue is happening. Phobias are real. Just look them up. There's like 30 million Americans have a phobia. Typically, it's a phobia of public speaking, or snakes, or high places, or something like that. But the concept hasn't quite gotten into people's minds that you can actually systematically and intentionally install phobias in people's mind, that they're going to be possessed by evil spirits, they're going to go to hell, they're going to lose their salvation if they talk to their friend who left the church, or read that article, or and everything I know about religion, I'm Jewish, I belong to a temple, I confess, I'm speaking to the Ethical Culture Society, I do belong to a Jewish renewal temple in Brookline, Massachusetts, but we believe that, you know, God, however we understand him, her, it, the divine presence within all that lives, the idea in the Abrahamic religions is the idea of choice and free will. That the metaphor, the story of Adam and Eve was about choice, not God making people robots and making them be obedient. And yet a lot of these religious cults are trying to rework that theme of choice, the freedom to believe, the freedom not to believe. You know, to love God with all your heart, mind, and strength can also mean all of your heart means the doubting and the confusion and the, I don't know, God, what's up? Tell me, what's happening? And so I now am of the opinion that what cults are doing, especially religious cults, is they're violating people's religious freedoms by their deceptive recruiting and by their mind control indoctrination. So while they may say, we have freedom in the United States, well, you have freedom to believe anything, but you don't have freedom to act. And if we apply the same standard that we do to used car salesmen as we do to groups that call religions, we'd be, casting out a lot of groups from tax exemption status. And I think we should. We need to respect people's human rights. You agree with me?
Yes.
Yes. So how to ethically help people who've been already compromised in their minds? Well, some basic themes I want to share. That mind control or undue influence is not 100%, even with the most extreme groups. And even with people who've been born into these groups, because I've been counseling them now, and they're coming out in their 20s and 30s, there's something innate in our DNA. We want to be free. We want to be loved. That we want to have people who are trustworthy in our lives and not have people exploiting us and manipulating us and hurting us. We don't like it. And people are walking out of these totalistic groups because they fundamentally are not doing what they preach. They paint these beautiful fantasies of everybody loving each other, and we're all comrades and brothers and sisters and everything. But how they're acting is anything but loving and kind and compassionate. Of course, the ends justify the means. Once we wipe out all the sinners, then we can create the ideal world. Well, it's not going to work that way. History is replete with dictators who have that kind of Hitler-esque agenda. So essentially, over 3.5 decades, and I should say the biggest shift in the 36 years was the internet, because one of the 4 components of the bike model is information control. And now, if you Google the name of the group, plus the name of the leader, plus cult, plus brainwashing, plus scam, and you go past the first 10 hits, because often the cults jam the search engine, so you don't even find the critical ones first. If you dig a little bit deeper, you can usually find something if a group has been around for a while. And then you can start networking. Hey, what was your experience? Oh yeah, they lied to me too. Yeah, they made me give up my children, or they told me to get an abortion, or they told me to drop out of school, whatever. Told me to lie to my parents. So the internet changed everything, and in particular, in the last few years, a social networking group called Anonymous changed everything. In terms of my work with Scientology especially, because a whole bunch of these young, computer-savvy people were like, we don't like that Scientology is bullying everybody on the internet. And they started digging a little deeper and a little deeper. And Wikipedia has actually banned Scientologists because they were messing around too much. Unfortunately, with groups like the World Mission Society, Church of God, they still have all the cult propaganda up there, and like this little tiny thing about the problem. Movies too. So I'm putting out an appeal for anyone who's listening to this tape or anyone in this room. If you have some spare time and you want to do something righteous, put up some facts about a destructive mind control group that somebody could find one day if they're looking for some assistance. That would be a really good thing to do. So back to the theme of this talk, and then maybe we'll do some questions and answers, and then I'm going to go upstairs and have lunch, and we can schmooze a little bit more and get a schmooze. But basically, activism is where it's at, information is where it's at, and not being mean and nasty to cult members, even if they're being mean and nasty to you, but realizing they're victims, that they really have been indoctrinated into a very black and white, us versus them, good versus evil, narrow consciousness, where they have to be obedient, rather than be in touch with their conscience, rather than be in touch with their own inner goodness and their own sense of fair play and empathy. The good news is that deep down inside, people walk out. In fact, one of my friends, Tori Chrisman, who was in Scientology for 30 years, and she was OT7, left because Andreas Hidal, who does a website called Xenu.net. Xenu is the galactic dictator. Anyway, he was nicer to her than the cult members were. And he said, are they really your friends? Were the words that opened the door for her to start really giving herself permission to think about all of the doubts and contradictions she had experienced for 30 years as a Scientologist. It's never too late to wake up and leave and reclaim your life. And for those family members who are concerned about a loved one's had a radical personality change, don't give up hope. And network. Because a lot of times the cult has instilled phobias in your loved one against you, but the cult hasn't, or the cult controlling person hasn't installed a phobia against everyone else in that person's life. So if you can find other people to network with who might have access to your loved one, you have a chance to ethically influence them. And there is a truism. When you're in a cult, you don't think you're in a cult. When you've been brainwashed, you don't think you've been brainwashed. But you think other groups are cults, and you think other people are brainwashed. That's the paradigm. So if you ask people what were Heaven's Gate members, remember the people in '97 that killed themselves with the black Nike sneakers, just do it? If you watch their exit videos, meaning the videos they made just before they killed themselves or had themselves killed, would be a better and more accurate way of saying it. I have yet to have any cult member watch those people and say these people are in cults and these people are brainwashed, because it's so obvious. So the approach is really explaining social psychology, explaining the Ash conformity study, the Milgram obedience study, the Zimbardo prison study, explaining the basics about hypnosis, explaining the basics of social psychology, step one, explaining how other groups are cults and educating the person about other groups, and then in a loving way asking, how is your group different? How does the bite model not fit your group? But in a loving way, not a confrontational way, not an angry way. It will really help me understand. I might consider to join your group if you can convince me that you're thinking for yourself. Let's dialogue. And most people are true believers. They want to believe that what they're committing their lives to is real. And so the true believers will engage in a conversation if they're approached by the right person in the right way at the right time. And that's pretty much the heart of what I call the strategic interactive approach. It's creating a network of informed people, usually family members, friends, maybe ex-members, getting them all together in a room, learning about the person, learning about the cult. Usually I have an ex-member from that particular group there to educate everybody what the loaded language is. And then talking together about, tell me about your relationship, and would you be willing to go have lunch? Would you be willing to go meet with the person and talk about X, Y, Z? And then me kind of developing a coaching strategy to do ethical influence, to just motivate the person to take the time out, gather information about what is mind control, what do the critics say, what do the ex-members say, think about their own experiences, and start reality testing. Because if it's legitimate, it will stand up to scrutiny. That's my argument. If it's legitimate, it will stand up to test. That's the whole essence of the scientific method. We have a hypothesis, let's test it. Right? So, it's never too late. Love is stronger than mind control. And it's learnable. My approach is learnable, which is why I've written this book, why I'm doing workshops, why I'm videotaping the workshops and putting them for free online so that people can understand this phenomenon, start educating their children, start educating their siblings, start educating their loved ones, and we need to update the laws, the legal system. Because a lot of these cults have a lot of money, and they can afford the top legal talents, and they can lobby Washington and try to keep everyone confused that there's no such thing as undue influence. There's no such thing as brainwashing. And I'm standing in front of you and I'm saying, I'm living proof. I've survived. And there are millions of other people who have experienced it firsthand and can say, you know what? There is such a thing. They put all kinds of wacky ideas in my head. They did all kinds of things that I never would have contemplated doing if I hadn't been exposed to this authoritarian organization. So, Freedom of Mind is my website. If on the left-hand side it says Steve's Archived Videos, you can go through those if you want. The Bite Model, my book. And I know that there are some local folks who are activists for many years against cult groups that you can talk with if you're interested in volunteering or getting active or something like that. If you're a former member and wanted to see whether or not Hassan has horns, no, I'm balding. but I don't have horns. And I want to thank you for inviting me again. And let's do a little questions and answers, okay? Do you want to talk?
Just jump around the room a little bit.
Jump around the room. Yeah. Yes, what's the
word
question?
you use, it seems to me, to describe all the things that these groups do, seems to apply equally well to the fundamentalist Christians, Jews, and Muslims. You know, what's the difference?
So the question is that what I'm describing seems to apply to fundamentalists, Jews, Christians, Hindus. I say if it walks like a duck, has feathers like a duck, has DNA like a duck, you decide. That's what's so nice, I think, about the bite model. Thanks, Monica. Is that you look at the behaviors. And if a church of any kind is telling you you can't talk to your brother or sister because he left, you know, there's something wrong with this. You know, huh? What? You can't talk to an ex-member who's a best friend? What's up with that? There's something fundamentally wrong with that. So, I didn't mention the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but look it up. It's a really handy list of human rights, like the freedom to assemble, the freedom of the press, the freedom to have medical treatment, you know, like really basic things that we as Americans take for granted. And a lot of mind control cults, they don't allow their members to have that. Yes, ma'am?
Scientology actually uses that.
Scientology actually uses what?
The United Nations Declaration as part of their way to happiness, and they incorporate it, saying that but as we know, it's cynical, and they're using it to say we need freedom of religion.
Well, you bring up the, you reinforce the point that these groups are deceptive,
right,
and that what they say is not how they act.
Right.
So they quote Einstein and Gandhi and, you know, all kinds of Mandela, etc. They're acting like Hitler. Yeah, L. Ron Hubbard, exactly. So the thing is, don't look at just the words, except when a group says the world's going to come to an end in 2012, and they're a biblical prophecy group, and then it doesn't come to an end, and then they say we never said it. Like the Jehovah's Witnesses 4 times, by the way. And people say, oh, the Jehovah's Witnesses are a mind control cult. Like behavior control, information control, thought control, emotional control. The quacks like a duck. If it's the Mormons, someone was asking about the Mormons. We almost had a Mormon president. I was asked to counsel people out of the Fundamentalist Latter-day Saints, which is a group that was run by Warren Jeffs, the polygamy, groups where they were marrying 12-year-old girls to 65-year-old men. And I counseled some women, and then I was invited to Salt Lake City to address the Ex-Mormon Foundation. Ex-MormonFoundation.org is their website, because they wanted me to present my bike model. And I was like, really? That's interesting. Sure, I'll come. I'll pretty much go anywhere. If Scientology invites me to talk about the bike models, I have a bodyguard. Anyway, I'm going through the bike model, and I have 250 people, mostly 5th and 6th generation Mormons, going like this. Like that. And I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. Tell me more. And they're like, well, I'm not allowed to talk to my sister, and I'm like, that's really, really interesting. And what blew my mind completely, and it's on YouTube, so you can actually watch what I'm about to tell you. This fellow who taught at their training institute gave a presentation called, ready for this, Lying for the Lord, Deception as a Management Tool of the LDS Church. And he started with Joseph Smith. He went through all the major leadership of Mormon religion, and he ended with a tape recording of him and his boss where he's saying, so you're telling me that unless I lie to my students, I can't teach here? And his boss said, that's correct. You'll lose your, you'll be fired. And he said, well, then I quit. And he played that tape, and when I heard that presentation, I was like, holy moly. And if you do Lying for the Lord in quotes on YouTube, you'll find this fellow's talk, and it blew my mind. Yes, sir?
What exactly is the bike model?
The bike model stands for behavior control, information control, see the B is for the behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control. And I basically say any group that's controlling these 4 overlapping components to make someone dependent and obedient on the authority figures of the group is doing destructive, unethical mind control on this side of the continuum. So, you know, you can apply it to potentially to a family system. You can apply it to your boss at work. But it's got I'm talking about the totalistic package where you literally have a radical personality change like I did. Went from, you know, theme words, question authority to, you know, I don't care if he's like Hitler, I've chosen to follow him and I'll follow him to the end. Literally what I said in my deprogramming. Yes, sir, in the back.
I'm going to assume that there are certain predispositions to joining a cult, or at least being captured by it.
Yes, you're breathing.
If you
You're intelligent.
Is it anyone, or are people who are, say, subclinically depressed? Is there a gender difference? Are there differences in age and other patterns, familial organization?
Yes.
I'd like to know what sorts of folks would be more vulnerable than others.
Very good question. What types of people are more vulnerable than others? The answer is there are thousands of these different unethical groups out there, and no one person is going to be, you know, successfully recruited by a particular group, but there are patterns. I can tell you that the group that I was in, we deliberately would never approach anyone who was mentally ill, had some serious emotional problems, whatever, because we wanted workers who were very intelligent, educated, who were persuasive speakers, who were good fundraisers, etc. So we were not looking for anyone who was ill in any way, shape, or form. We were looking for intelligent, educated, college-educated, passionate, wanting to make themselves better, wanting to make the world a better place. As a generalization, I can tell you that there are situational vulnerabilities that we as human beings all experience. Like, I was recruited right after my girlfriend dumped me in college. And I was approached by 3 smiling girls who were flirting with me, asking me if they could sit at my table at Queens College. So that was, I wasn't looking for a group, but a girlfriend. And so there are situational vulnerabilities, death of a loved one, illness, moving to a new city, state, or country, etc. There does seem to be some evidence that if someone is depressed and a cult recruiter befriends them and makes them feel good, they're going to be more receptive to attention or to someone who is helping them. But there's the most important principle in social psychology is called the fundamental attribution error. Fundamental attribution error. What is that fundamental error? Social psychology says that when we look at other people to try to figure out why they're doing what they're doing, we overestimate personality variables and we underestimate social environmental influence variables. So another way of saying that is, hey people, we have 5 senses, we are raised in a social setting, and we're wired to adapt to our environment. And we would like to believe that we're choosing a particular brand of toothpaste or whatever, but 9 times out of 10 it's because you've seen a particular commercial 50 times and you just weren't paying attention to it. And that's why you're selecting it when you're going shopping. So this bias of people who get into cults are weak or stupid, or when, like I was saying before about Paul Haggis saying I was stupid, he's not a stupid person at all. He just didn't understand what was going to be done to him, and done incrementally. They don't say up front, by the way, we're celibate, you know, my former cult, we're celibate, we believe Moon is 10 times greater than Jesus Christ, Moses, Buddha, and Muhammad. They didn't say that. They're like, oh, hi. You're cute. You want to come for dinner? Yes?
Can you speak at all to how you address, like what happens in one-on-one relationships where one person seems to encompass the power that in a cult is, embodied by hundreds of people. That seems, surprising, impressive. I mean, a variety of things. And how do you actually sometimes successfully get those people into a couples counseling? And then what do you do when, typically if the approach is you're working with both people, when you recognize one person really is more of a controlling type, what do you do?
Yeah, so the question is about a controlling person and what are the features and then how I try to help.
Yeah, well not a person as a cult leader, but like in one-on-one relationships.
So it turns out that most controllers and most cult leaders come from the narcissistic personality disorder family of psychiatric issues. What does that mean? That they really fail to make a healthy attachment in the first 22 months of life, is the latest theory, with mother, to develop a healthy sense of self and feel good about themselves and develop empathy by connecting with mother. So there's something called the adult attachment inventory. People can actually be evaluated whether they have secure attachment or disorganized attachment or insecure attachments of different forms. But the key point is that someone who's a narcissist may be very persuasive that they love you. Oh, you're the most wonderful person on the planet. And convince a person of that. But a narcissist is unable to love in the fundamental meaning of the word love. Because if you love someone, that means you can put yourself in their shoes, feel what they're feeling, anticipate their needs, and be considerate of their feelings. Well, narcissists guess at what's the right behavior for whatever. And typically, when someone gets into a relationship, it can be with a woman or a man, by the way. It's not just men controlling women. There are narcissistic women who can control. Typically, what happens with the narcissist only wants to be surrounded by yes people who approve of them. And when a relationship forms and family members and friends are watching the dynamics, they're going like, I don't know about this woman, or I don't know about this guy. The narcissist picks up on those signals and starts instilling bad thoughts and bad feelings towards the family and friends. Oh, they're just trying to control you. They don't want you to grow up. They don't know. So the answer really, in my experience, a one-on-one can be as powerful or more than involvement in a multi-thousand person cult, because the controller is living with you and sleeping next to you.
What percentage of the time can they get well, narcissists?
Good question. What percentage of the time can narcissists be cured? If you asked me that question 2 years ago, I would say there's no known treatment that works. But I'm in a professional seminar with one of the top scholars, who's a psychologist, who actually was the top expert witness for the sexual abuse victims against the Catholic Church. His name is Dan Brown, DanielBrownPhD.com is his website. And he's been doing attachment therapy, specifically hypnotizing clients who are coming for treatment, and encouraging them to imagine early parenting experiences and redoing them with a healthy internal parent, parental figures. To have a mother who comes when called and needed. And in 2 to 3 years, and we know this for a fact, apparently, what he says, because in Europe, they're doing efficacy studies and follow-up studies, and they're showing people can actually change profoundly. So, but we're not to the level of Europe. We're in managed care where we have to have 10 sessions and go off, and not to do 2 to 3 years of therapy. I'm getting the signal that can I just ask this one last one, and then we can talk upstairs if you have one.
The most famous practitioner of psychology in this country, I suppose, is Tom Hanks.
Tom Cruise.
Tom Cruise, thank you.
My fantasy is to be in a room with Tom Cruise and get to talk with him with cameras and film them. because I'm going to interrupt you just for a second. Just because in Scientologists they're programmed to believe that they control matter, energy, space, and time, and that they can talk to anybody about anything at any time. That's part of the beliefs. So I would love to be with Tom Cruise.
Well,
If you see this, Tom.
but did that help destroy his marriage?
Absolutely. Well, I can't say absolutely. How do I know? It's my theory that Katie Holmes did not want her child to be subjected to Scientology processes. She apparently had been in touch with Nicole Kidman, had found out that Nicole had to give up custody of her children to Tom Cruise when she was leaving the marriage in Scientology. And I think it was out of protection for Suri, the little girl, that she made the move sooner than later. That's my hypothesis.
He's very successful, I'm sure.
He's very wealthy and he does a lot of acting jobs, but he's very mind controlled, in my opinion. But is it possible to help him get out? Yeah, of course. He's breathing. Like I said, breathing is the criteria. So I think we have to wrap up. I really appreciate your coming and the first time.